welcome to the Wednesday night Grumpy Sound Guy show. My name is J.R. Everhart. I am the Grumpster himself. Welcome, welcome to our Wednesday night show, our little discussion that we have every week about mixing and bands and venues and all kinds of other things that drive us crazy about the music business. I am going to kind of sort of freestyle this week because I keep getting asked a lot of the same questions, and I want to take the time to maybe address some of this stuff. I'm being asked because we did the whole Art of Mixing Part 1 and 2. It's been gangbusters. I've gotten huge amounts of response off of that stuff, not just from YouTube, but also on some of the other socials where I had shared the YouTube link. And I was asked really to kind of go through my thought process as I'm doing sound check in terms of frequency, compression, EQing, compression, gates, stuff like that. And this video could go on for probably 90 minutes with me discussing that. And there's a lot of variables to this. And this is why I haven't had this discussion, because what I'm going to tell you isn't going to work for everybody, but it should work for most decent bands that have decent gear, that know how to tune their drums, know how to have decent guitar tone, know how to have a decent bass tone. I just seen who was it? I seen a world-renowned bass player. I forget who it was. His name escapes me right now. I played with Phil Collins way back in the day. Just talked today on TikTok about how, when he kind of rummages around YouTube, seeing up-and-coming YouTube bass players, all he sees is chops, and no one's really talking about bass tone or playing in the pocket or feel, and he's basically harping on the same thing that any professional musician will harp on with young guys, which is chops don't pay the bills. Usually learning how to play to the song and play as a band and play in the pocket is really where the money is. I can remember John Blackwell, who played with Prince for many years, talking about just straight pocket 2 and 4 being where all the money is, and how his father really drilled that into his head. So that could be a whole nother episode of the Grumpy Sound Guy. But as I was saying, if you got a band that understands some of those things, they're a band that actually plays together well, that gels. And by that, what I mean is I just seen a band this past weekend, and they kind of reminded me of just 5 individuals playing on stage, not one harmonious work of art. And there's a huge difference between that and 5 individuals on stage. When you get 5 guys on stage, especially if they're a bunch of chops, oriented kind of guys that are just trying to get their time in the spotlight and show everybody how good of a player they are. A lot of times when you got guys like that in your band, the band itself doesn't sound great. Maybe that guitar player or that bass player or drummer who's trying to make that spotlight their own can look good for a few moments here or there throughout the night, but anybody worth their salt, that 3% that I always talk about playing toward or playing to, that understand the difference between what's good and what's bad, they're not going to be blown away by your band, no matter how much talent is in the band. And I've seen some bands with some crazy amount of talent, but did not have that gel, did not have that fluid motion as one musical movement, and they're really not that great. They're not going to blow your mind. So as a sound engineer, I try to the best of my ability. Now, with the festivals and the big outdoor stuff that I do, where someone else is booking the bands, I have no say over who I work with from day in to day out. It's whoever's on the bill. We're going to make it through whatever their 90-minute set is, and put our best foot forward and work those things into its proper place. But for the most part, the clients I choose to go work for individually. Bands, cover bands that call me, they're the only band on the bill. They're going to play 3 sets or 2 90-minute sets or, something of that fashion. I'm real selective with who I work with, because it's no fun working with a band full of individuals, even if the money's right. And sometimes, look, I'm a money whore like everybody else, and sometimes I'll whore myself out to someone I don't really enjoy mixing because it pays well. Money pays my bills, not a really cool band. So I have to keep that in perspective. But for the most part, I have weeded out all the stinkers and have weeded out a lot of bands that I just didn't enjoy mixing. I just didn't see a future with. As a sound engineer, I want to work for bands that people support, bands that have a following, bands that are really good musically, because when I go mix them, number one, my job is way easier because they're a great band. Number two, there's a lot of opportunity to grow there. There's a lot of opportunity for other bands to see what I do because they're a popular band. And, there's nothing worse than really busting your rear end during sound check and trying to make things happen for a band that just isn't really that great of a band, And I'm trying to be really careful with my words here, because I don't want to offend anybody. If you're a C or a low B band that's just trying to get it together and you've been together 10 minutes, you get a pass. All right. You're still trying to figure out your lineup. Maybe you've had some people quit and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm in a band, so I understand how all that stuff works. It's really the biggest reason why I don't play more than what I do, is because the band I'm in is absolutely wonderful. And we get along and we love each other and we enjoy playing with each other. But our schedules are going in 20 different directions. But the reason I'm not playing in any number of other bands that I could be playing in is because of the drama, because I just don't have the stomach for it anymore. And I'm getting old and cranky. So I don't do well with that. So there's nothing worse than putting your best foot forward, bringing the right gear to the gig and everything else, and still you just got a band that's not going to be super great. Now, you can take a good sound engineer, and we talked about this in our Art of Mixing, series, can take a band that's not so great and make them pretty good, especially if you can take a band that's not so great but got 2 or 3 guys in the band that are like really, really good, and those 3 out of the 5 or 6 know how to play well together. Then you can lean into it that way, and you can really shape the band around them. And as long as you got a drummer that can keep time, he don't even have to be a flashy drummer. Even if he's just a meat and potatoes guy and he's just playing what's on the record, that's perfectly okay. I'll take that over a guy that's trying to throw, 5 gallons of chops into a 2-gallon hat, you know what I mean? Any day of the week. So, yeah. So I said all that to say there's the foundation that I try to put in front of me before I even get to the iPad or I get to the console to start doing sound check. But as I'm doing sound check, here is my train of thought. Here is what goes on in my head while I'm going through sound check. I always start from the drums. I usually go drums, bass, guitars, keys, vocals. Sometimes if they have tracks, I'll do tracks after drums, because usually the drummer's controlling the tracks. But sometimes I'm just kind of looking at the stage and it's whoever's ready. I like to do drums first, that way I can lay the low end where it needs to be with the kick drum, floor toms, and bass guitar. If I can get that stuff where I want it, then, I can work the other stuff and shape the other stuff around in the first couple songs. And let me say that too, because that stands to be, recognized, is that, we're not trying to turn the blunt rock into a sculpture at Soundcheck. We're trying to make sure all the tools to turn that blunt rock into a sculpture are present during sound check. Most of us in the industry call that a line check. So we're basically making sure the kick is in the kick channel, the bass guitar is in the bass guitar channel, everything's where it's supposed to be in the mixer. Once we have that established, I will do preliminary EQing, and if there's something wonky that kind of sticks out to me during sound check, I will take a second to work that out. But I also don't get so hyper focused on each individual piece that I forget what it's going to sound like in the context of the program. Like, I've seen guys chase a little bit of a ring and a snare drum or something, not a feedback ring, but just a weird ring in the snare drum for 15 minutes or even 5 minutes is torture in a club, when you're trying to rush through a sound check without, disturbing the dinner crowd, or you got whatever's going on around you. I have a start scene that has a whole bunch of this stuff that I'm talking about already built into the start scene of my M32s. So I'm kind of like 85.3% there. As soon as I fire the scene up, I just need to get the levels right. Obviously, compression is going to need to be adjusted, and EQs are going to need to be tweaked just a little bit for the specific instruments of that night. But I'm not getting super, super hyper-focused on anything or falling in love with anything during sound check so much, because that little bit of a snare drum ring, you may not even hear once the rest of the band gets going. So why are you spending a ton of time trying to, if it's loud and it's obviously needs to be fixed, I know I get a lot of like 350 or 400 rings out of poorly tuned snare drums sometimes when I'm trying to hit the gain on the snare channel to get it to pop the way I want, especially through the compressor, because I squish the snare pretty hard. And yeah. So, if there's something obnoxious that absolutely is going to be there when the band is playing, then, I'll find that real quick and get it out of the way. But I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on it, I just need to get all the tools in place. I will chip away at that blunt rock throughout the first, 2 to 5 songs of the first set and really kind of get the thing dialed in, starting at the channels first, then into the subgroups, then into final left-right aux sub, and getting compression there, right? I always start at the channels with compression, get them where I want them there. Then I'll go to the aux group, or if I have any parallel compression channels, which I don't typically run a bunch of that stuff. But I think I'm going to start running some more parallel compression, just because I find myself mixing on my stuff more than anybody. I have like 3 or 4 guys that work for me. And I always kind of keep it simple, thinking, well, I don't want to overcomplicate it for them, so that it's a lot easier just to walk in and mix. But I think I am going to dabble a little bit more here in 2024 with some parallel compression. I absolutely believe in all the parameters and the benefits of that. I'm just all about keeping things simple, especially in these throw and go situations where we got just enough time to get everything up and going, do the show, tear it down, and get it out of the way and go home. There's not a lot of time to fall in love with the mix. So you got to kind of keep that stuff in perspective. So as I'm going through sound check, I'm keeping all those things in perspective, Usually with kick, I'm a drummer, so I'm very anal about the drum mix, but not so overly attentive to it that I spend too much time on it. I can remember back in analog days, where you had a rack of gates and compressors and 31 band EQs and stuff like that. Like everybody would run a 31 on the kick and a 31 on the snare. It would compress kick and snare. I do all that stuff digitally now. I don't run 31s on the kick and snare because I don't need to, because we have better EQs and the digital stuff than what we had on board in the analog days. But I can remember guys literally spending I was at a show, I was probably 16, 17 years old, big outdoor show, and they must have spent 15 minutes on the first rack tom, and I was like, what is, even at 16, 17 years old, I was like, what is going on here? Why is it taking them so long to get through the first rack tom? But hey, whatever, it is what it is. That is an epic failure by today's standards when it comes to doing sound check. Nightclub owners and concert promoters that don't set aside a specific doors closed in the club intimate sound check time, which, let's be honest, rarely happens in the middle market, unless we have a national and it's in the contract and they got to clear the restaurant or the club out before that. I don't work in a whole lot of purpose-built indoor places. Most of my indoor clubs are multi-purpose venues. They're menu venues. They're a pool hall or a sports club or a brewery or something like that. And the bottom line is there's people sitting in the room, and the last thing they want to hear is, 15 minutes of rack one, So that would be an epic fail. I really am, honestly, my start scene is so dialed in with my rig at this stage of the game that I'm really through sound check in about 5 to 8 minutes, tops, and That even includes once I get everything, the line check done and know everything is where it's supposed to be, then that's including letting the band play through, a verse and a chorus of something. Usually at that point, I need to hear the vocals and play with the stage volume so I can start dialing in some of the compression. But a lot of that compression stuff is not going to really get where it needs to be until the vocalists get warmed up and they're really singing correctly. They're practicing their mic technique correctly. Sometimes the first song or two, it takes especially a lead vocalist, especially if they're a guy with a high register, or they're someone who just doesn't put any effort into warming up before they get on stage. Their vocal level in song 1 is going to be radically different than their vocal level in song 5 or 6. So sometimes I'm sitting there kind of waiting for that to play out. I'm just waiting for the vocals to get warmed up and get into a place where everyone's singing the way they know they should be singing. Once we get to that level, then I can really start dialing in and working in compression where it needs to be and that sort of thing to get the vocals the way I like them, So we start with drums, kick. I'm looking for 50 hertz thump, in the kick. And then the attack is usually, somewhere between 2.5 and 3.5, even 4K, depending on how the drum is tuned. Some guys who play vintage drums, older drums, especially drums out of the 70s and 80s, they don't really have that 50 hertz. So don't be surprised if you don't find yourself scrolling up to, 65, 70 hertz, somewhere in that ballpark to find that chest punch, that you feel. And then again, adjust that attack so you get that little bit of a click feel, out of the beater. I use a Beta 52 90% of the time. I have Beta 91s and all that kind of stuff. And Beta 91 is my favorite kick mic. But Beta 91 is not compatible with every kick drum, So for the sake of time, and there's so much of the stuff that I talk about on this channel that I would radically do different if I was on tour, with someone and had a 2-hour sound check and had, could use a 91 in and a 52 out or a D6 out in the kick or something like that, or even a 57 around the batter head to get more attack there. Yeah, man, that would be phenomenal. I would love all that. I'd probably have a wave rack going with a bunch of plugins and parallel compression, the drums, and doing all the cool, fun stuff that those guys get to do. But in the middle market, in to the audience that I'm speaking to with this content, it's not realistic for that to be the way every show goes. You may get an outdoor show every now and then where you can play around with some of that stuff. I'm to a point at 51 years old, man, where I just don't have an ego about it. I want it to sound good. I want it to be artistic. I want the musicality to be a big driving force with how I mix front of house. But at the same time, I'm not going to jump through a bunch of fiery hoops to sound like Aerosmith or Keith Urban or the Foo Fighters, leave that to those guys. And this band's only on stage for, 40 minutes. They're an opening band. I'm not going to fall in love with the mix. You know what I mean? I'm going to make it the best it can be. The better the band is, the better the mix will be. That's always the case, but so for the sake of time and setup time and everything that we do in this middle market and clubs and stuff, I just use a 52, a Beta 52. A Beta 52 always gives me everything that I need. I don't have any problem getting 50 hertz out of it to give you a nice chest pounding punch. And then I have no problem getting the attack that I want at that usually 3 to 4K area. And then I scoop out the mid-range in the EQ big time, especially like around 350, 400 hertz or whatever. That's usually where that peak is, maybe 500 hertz. I just kind of sweep it around a little bit in the M32 on the iPad and get it where I wanted it to just pull everything out that I don't want. I do gate the kick, but not much. My gate on the kick is very liberal. It's very free. It's very open. I don't gate the kick super hard because I usually don't have any problems with low end feedback from the kick because I'm aux sub and the only thing going to the subs is what I choose to put in it. And that's usually just kick drums, some floor toms, bass guitar, left-handed keyboards. That's it. No guitars. Most of the keyboard's going to come out of the top. All the vocals are going to come out of the top. You know, if you have a horn section, that's coming out of the top. You know, I mean, unless maybe you got a Barry sax or a tuba or something. I mean, but, you know, most guys have a couple trombones and a horn, or a sax, a horn, and a trombone, like especially in ska bands and stuff like that. That's usually with that. That's all coming out of left, right tops, you know. So being able to control that with just being set up aux sub really makes life a whole lot easier, you know, that way. So, yeah, so I'm looking for that 50 hertz. I'm looking for that sweet punch spot for that kick drum. Most modern drum sets, even middle of the road drum sets, I'm sitting here next to a Pearl export kit that was actually something that just showed up at my shop about 4 or 5 days ago. And it's a modern lacquer finish. You can see the wood grain through the finish. It's a modern export kit. It's got like, man, it might have some maple in it. I think it's mostly popular plywood, you know, shells. Nothing expensive, nothing crazy. But you put an E-mat on that kick. It's a 20-inch kick, by the way, too. You put an E-mat on that kick, and I'll guarantee you I'll get 50 hertz out of it all day long. You know, so the manufacturing process of drums have drastically gotten better. So all you guys that are out there playing like middle of the road stuff like PDP, I have 3 PDP drum sets, twisted ivory finish, and all of them, 2 of them are 24 kick, 1 is a 22 kick. And then, like I said, this export kit just showed up at the shop the other day. I'm probably going to put heads on it. I don't know if I'm going to keep it or just throw it in inventory for backline stuff. Like if I got a cheap backline rental or something where they don't care about the quality of the drums, it don't have to be all maple shells. You know, I'll probably keep it for that. But what I'm getting at, like the Gretsch Catalina Club maple, you know, stuff is excellent. A ton of that Mapex maple stuff, even though it's European maple, it's not North American rock maple and all that kind of jazz or whatever. I had a DW collector's kit, absolutely loved it. It definitely sounded better than any drum set I've ever had. I played on a lot of different drum sets, but it wasn't like double the price better than, say, you know, a Star Classic maple kit, or man, Sonar, you know, Sonar SQ2 stuff is ridiculous. You know, I think they're really giving DW a run for their money, and I think they're maybe be even more expensive. It's a German company. You know, high-end Pearl stuff, you know, once you get up into those solid maple shells, and I know DW really markets itself on their manufacturing process in California. And you know what? Yeah, maybe they're doing it different than everybody else. I don't know. You know, I mean, I know from a sound engineer's perspective and being a drummer as a sound engineer, you know, I've gotten kick drums and snare drums that sounded phenomenal out of popular blend shells with a drummer who knew how to tune a kit and had the right heads on the kit. You know, and a Ludwig Acrolite, you know, snare drum, you know what I'm saying? Like, or a steel Ludwig snare drum, you know, a Sensophonic, or, you know, any number of like middle of the road, you know, metal snare drums. I think my number one right now is a hammered brass Gretsch is the thing I'm playing in J3. It sounds like $1 million. It was like, I don't know, $600 or $700 snare. It wasn't like a $1,500, $2,500 snare. But I mean, it gets it done, dude. And I'm kind of a snare drum snob, so it's always the Indian, not the arrow. You know, I always try to communicate that. So as I'm going through, you know, the drums, I compress the snare a good bit. Definitely like hi-hat to be part of the equation. And there's a lot of throw and go situations where we don't put a hi-hat mic up. You know, most in-ear rigs that I see bands showing up with don't have a hi-hat mic in their in-ear rig. I think that's a mistake, honestly. I only do it when there's no time, and it's just not one more thing we got to fight through when we're already at a cattle call gig with 5 bands and all that crazy stuff, you know. If I'm setting the stage, I'll probably throw one up just out of habit. But, you know, when my guys are asking me, I'm like, I'm good either way, whatever you want to do. A lot of these stages are small, and hi-hats and especially crash cymbals, they will they will bleed through the vocal mics because we got so many singers that sing soft. So we got the vocal mics pretty hot. You know, when you're only standing 5 feet from the drum set, you really don't need a whole bunch of that stuff. I take overheads. I run overheads when I'm outside. I never run overheads inside. You know, if they want an overhead in for their ears, you know, for their ear mix, that's fine. It's never going to make it to front of house. You know, I mean, I might bend it down onto the ride cymbal and let that be, you know, what it is. Because I like some ride cymbal in the mix too. But again, a lot of these modern ride cymbals are so well made, that ping comes right through the mix. I just don't have a problem hearing it a lot of times, you know? So I don't stress out about that stuff. Again, I'm trying to work smarter, not harder here. We get to the bass guitar. Bass guitar is a hot button subject with me because I am not, let me just say this for the record, I am not against effects on bass guitar. Although I tell people all the time to not use effects on bass guitar. Let me explain that. The reason I say that is because so many people don't know how to use that stuff with any form of couth or taste. You know, they allow those things to rob the bass of all its tone, and then I'm back here trying to manufacture some tone out of your bass rig, and look, dude, crap in, crap out. It's sound reinforcement, not sound recreation. You know, remember that. Let me say that again, that we are responsible for reinforcing what you give us, not recreating what you give us. You know, so if you give us crap, then we got crap to deal with in the house, you know. We might be able to, you know, shellac some hocus pocus on it and make it a little better than what it was, but it crap in, crap out, dude. It's never going to be as good as it could be, you know. And I can't tell you how many bass players that I've had to mix that had a whole full-on pedal board full of bull butter and just no tone whatsoever, can't understand a thing that they're playing all night long. All night long. I did a bass player a couple years ago at a venue. It was a walk-in gig, and I looked at the EQ, and there was nothing but fret noise. Had a wonderful bass rig, whole bunch of buzzers and whistles that were just robbing him of any chance of having any kind of decent bass tone. So I work with what you give me, you know? And because I have this reputation of being the grumpy sound guy, I've now got to filter everything I say through the Care Bear filter to make sure I'm not hurting people's feelings, because everybody's scared to death I'm going to come online and call them out. And that's not what I'm doing this for, guys, and that's not what I'm here for, and I'm really trying not to be that guy. I really genuinely try to be a nice guy out on the job. So I've just gotten to a point where I don't say anything. You know, there was a time where I would go and try to help a bass player fix his tone so that it would be beneficial to the band. And probably 4 out of 5 times I was met with some form of resistance because they were unable to accept any sort of constructive criticism, especially if I'm just a new guy to them and it's the first time I've ever worked with them or something like that. They don't know me. They don't, you know, have a whole lot of confidence in my opinion. Okay, no problem, man. You give me crap, I'll mix crap. I'm getting paid, whatever, you know? So that just kind of is what it is. But in a perfect world, we'll say it that way, in a perfect world, you know, with the bass, I want the least amount of EQ. That's when I know a bass is right. When my EQ is flat, I got the right bass, you know, because I can adjust it in the aux sub to give me more or less of the low end. And what I usually do is pull the aux sub down and get the tone right first on the bass guitar. I want to hear the bass without the sub first, so that I can get all that high stuff that they're playing, any of the upper register stuff that they're playing. So I got that present, and then I bring the sub up so that it meets that. And now I got a nice full rounded bass tone that will cut through the guitars, will cut through the drums and vocals, keyboards, horns, whatever else is on stage, another percussion system, you know, percussion section. You know, and then the bass players that show up can actually hear what you're playing, hear every note that you're playing. I want to be able to hear every note that you're playing. I'm very anal that way. But if you give me some junk and I can't hear any of the notes you're playing and you claim that's your bass sound, hey man, I'm good, no problem. You do you, boo. I'm going to turn it up. I'm not going to correct a bunch of stuff. Every now and then I'll bring 100 hertz up, you know, something like that. Or if it's really boomy, you know, I won't pull as much aux sub into that channel, and I might push 1K up, as 1K will give you 800 to 1K will give you that nice rich bass tone. Anything over about 2.5 is kind of fret noise. I know some metal bands that like that fret noise, that aggressive attack from the bass. So that's one thing. But if you're mixing top 40 variety band, it's doing mainly stuff to make people dance and stuff like that, there shouldn't be any fret noise in the bass sound. And I ran into a guy not long ago. Well, I say not long ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago, who came in kind of looking over my shoulder, shadowing me at a house gig that I was at. And he had very strong opinions about how I wasn't mixing the bass guitar correctly, because I didn't put a bunch of that 3 and 4K in the bass channel. And I'm like, to me, it just sounds like a bunch of clanking chains being thrown around a shop or something, in the mix. I'm always like, what was that? And then it was fret noise is what it was, or someone doesn't have their bass set up right and their string keeps hitting their pickup. I've had that a few times with young bands where they don't have the bass itself, the instrument itself is not set up correctly. And as they're hammering on the strings with their fingers, they're pushing the string against the pickup, and that creates a pop in the system every time they do that. Well, then I got to go to the EQ and try to find that, and unfortunately it's usually right in the guts of the tone of the bass, and I got to pull that out so it doesn't get in the way of the musicality of what's going on with the band. So that's bass guitar. Acoustic guitars, man, acoustic guitars are all over the place because they're made so radically different, in terms of output. I have some acoustic guys that I got to run an active DI on, like a J48 or a Pro 48 radial, phantom powered, direct input box, or they'll have a Sans amp or something like that in their pedal board that is active to boost that acoustic signal. And I mean, sometimes they're Taylors and Martins, and I don't get that. I don't get why those things have such a low output sometimes, but I'm a drummer, so maybe there's some things there that I don't understand. I just know I need a nice, fat, warm sound from the guitar. I typically roll up the bottom end, the high pass filter, up to at least 75 or 80 hertz. There's nothing real musical underneath that. The only time I've ever not done that was with Kip Winger. He had a 12-string, did an acoustic show at a venue I worked at a few years ago, and he was a joy to work with. The guy's obviously very well-versed in sound engineering. We had a nice little conversation. He came into place, and my wife and I at the time were sitting there eating dinner, and he sat down next to me. He goes, "I guess you're JR," and he starts eating food off my plate. I thought it was the funniest thing in the world. And I'm like, dude, I said, we can order you some food if you're hungry, and he was just such a wonderful person to work with. And, we had a conversation, and he was very specific about the things that he wanted. And I totally was like, okay, and he even knew what my concerns would be about the things he was asking, specifically opening up the bottom end on the acoustic. He said, don't roll off the bottom end on the acoustic, because I use that for attack. I use the butt of my hand to hit the guitar sometimes as I'm playing, and that creates some rhythmic stuff, and I want it in the system. Okay, man, no problem. But he said, don't worry, I'm real good at controlling that. Okay, well, that was my only concern, was that you wouldn't be. But of course, this is Kip Winger. This isn't, Joe the plumber who plays acoustic guitar on the weekends at O'Malley's Sports Pub down on the corner. Although Joe the plumber might be a great, guitar player. I don't want Joe the plumber, blowing me up and cussing me out because I said he wasn't Kip Winger. But he's probably not. Otherwise, he wouldn't be a plumber. He'd be a rock star. Kip did a phenomenal job with that. He was very specific about, what he wanted vocally, and gave me a lot of liberty, with long delay and things like that. And we had a wonderful evening together. He even mentioned it several times from the stage about how refreshing it was to come to a venue and work with someone who knows what they're doing and kind of understands his genre of music, his style of vocal phrasing, because you can get away with a lot of long delay if you got somebody who understands how to phrase their vocals correctly to make that stuff happen. Of course, I'm flying all that stuff on, as he's doing it, as he's executing it, I'm flying it in and out. and making sure it doesn't get in the way of his more staccato type phrasing. And we just had this unspoken connection musically. And that's what I really live for in this business, is to work with people that I can, and I've had that many, many times with local and regional bands, guys that are just really super talented and really get it, really understand the parameters of what it is to be in a band. And, it's art at that point. It's art. Even my wife at that gig was like, wow, this was amazing. Even though she didn't really even understand why it was so amazing, Kip and I had that unspoken connection, and that worked really well. And we had a phenomenal evening. So that was one time ever that I was able to open up the bottom end. Any other time, it's just going to be a bunch of noise and stuff. And, 70, 80 hertz isn't the end of the world, for somebody even wants to beat on the guitar and be rhythmic a little bit, because what they're beating on is probably closer to 100 hertz or something like that. But I'll roll that thing back and forth in the EQ while they're playing, while they're performing. Maybe when they're in a section doing that rhythmic type, percussive thing with their guitar, and move that around to where it makes the most sense to the musicality of what they're giving me. Again, it comes back to the art form of mixing. It comes back to the idea of, let's make this the best it can be, and let's be at one with the performer, and that sort of thing. So electric guitars, moving right on. Man, with electric guitars, I roll off the bottom end about the same. I usually will cut, I'll probably roll the electric guitars up to like 80 or 90 for pop dance bands. If you're in a metal band and you like that low end crunch, then that's something that I'll just play with. I know what that crunch is supposed to sound like. I'm a fan of heavy music. I'll move it around to make it work, but as a rule, probably 90% of my bands that I mix are all top 40 variety bands, or or tribute bands, 80s hair band, tribute bands, Journey, Van Halen, stuff like that, AC/DC, or they're modern tribute bands. Like I did a Bruno Mars tribute band from LA last year. It was wonderful to work with. And that kind of, guitar doesn't have a lot of musicality going on in that sub, area, when you're basically a wah-wah, chicky kind of, guitar player in the pocket and just part of the rhythm section. And then when you hit your lead patch, it all opens up. So then that brings that conversation in, which is like, when I check guitars, I always check the dirty, I check the clean, and then I check the lead patch, so we can make sure all those volumes are close. Like clean and dirty should be like this. You might call it rhythm. I call it clean and dirty, or clean and distorted. And then I'm 100% okay if your lead patch is, 4 or 5 dB louder, because then that gives you a little bit of a punch during your solos. I don't have to chase it quite as hard to get your lead above everything and where I want it during your solos. I will always go to that channel during the solos just to make sure, even if I don't touch it, I want it right there, in case, especially if you're playing some kind of iconic melodic lead thing that is really part of the musicality of the song. I want to make sure that comes out. Or in a lot of cases, the guitar is covering a little synth part or something, in a pop song, and that they don't have a keyboard player in the band. So that needs to be at the top of the mix during that interlude. So I'm thinking from a musical perspective as much as a technical perspective with all this stuff. So I mean, that's basically guitars. If you need to brighten the guitar up, 3K is where I go most of the time, 2.5. It depends. I might sweep it a little bit, move it around a little bit on the EQ to get it where I want it. But usually 3K will if it's a little muddy, we'll bring it right where it needs to be. I don't mess with the mid-range too much, because that's where the meat of the guitar is. If they need some help at 500 or something, I will do that, but it's very, very rarely do I mess with the mid-range. It's usually get the low end where it is, so I do that sweep to about 80 or 90, and then I might do a little dip at like 120 or 150 or something like that, just to have it there visually so that if something gets wonky on the bottom end, I can kind of pull it down real quick. It's already set to where I want it. I'm not really cutting it much right out of the gate. Again, that's something I will shape during the first, 3 to 5 songs or whatever and get it where I want it. Moving right along, I guess I should, hit tracks too. A lot of bands are playing with tracks these days. So with tracks, the problem that I run into with tracks is unless the band really has their stuff together, which most of the bands do. I want to give credit where credit is due because I've complained a lot about this over the years, and some of my clients have heard those complaints and corrected that. Some have even handed me a set list and a Sharpie at the beginning of the night and say, look, make a note of how further up or down each track needs to go per song so that we can make the adjustments. And I've done that a couple times, working with the same band several times in a row, and we've been able to really get the tracks dialed in to where it's almost set it and forget it, almost, But yeah, so during sound check, okay, am I getting the tracks? Make sure that the click's not in there or any of the cues are in there, because usually tracks come, the music is going to be in left, and then the click and cues. When I say cues, that means there's going to be somebody in the click channel that says, chorus and 2, 3, 4, bam, there, now you're at the chorus, that sort of thing. That is a very popular thing with tracks these days. So I'm making sure that we don't have any kind of confusion with that, and that, the cues and the click are just going to ears, and the music is just coming to me. If they have their own mixer on stage and a split snake and they're mixing their own ears, then I don't even run that click channel to front of house. I just get the music side and I let them deal with the rest of that stuff. So yeah, and then we can throw the drum pad in with that. If they have like an octapad or something next to the hi-hat that they use or somewhere on the kit, I always make them give me the 808 low end hits so I can see the extreme of where that is, because many times you'll test that stuff just with some hand clap sounds or vibra slap or some other auxiliary percussion stuff they have set up on it, and you don't check the 808. You don't check that low end boo, because that thing can jump out and like set the room on fire if you're not ready for it. So I always ask if they use any 808s. If they don't, and a lot of bands don't, especially dance bands, it's usually hand claps, and that's just kind of what it is. In fact, they now make pads. It's just one single pad that's just hand claps. Don't even have an 808 feature. And then other guys like to use that 808 as a dramatic change into a song, or the last hit out of the last song of the end of the set. It has its place, So I want to hear that. I want to make it the maximum effect that it can be before clip, because when you don't check it and then they use it later during the show, 99% of the time it's going to clip the subs, So I check it during sound check, and I make sure that thing is got a leash on it, and it's where it needs to be. I've even had to roll the high pass filter up some because it was just way too unstable on the bottom end. When you get on cheaper drum processors, they don't do that 808 thing the same as like Roland and some of these other people who were, known for bringing that sound and that feel to electric drumming. So I know some of the cheaper Alesis units can be a little iffy that way, that are $150, $200 instead of, $700 to $1,000, $1,500. Some of them are $2,500, depending on what you get. If they're running tracks out of that, then that's another thing we have to contend with, because again, the track levels can be here or there. If it's coming out of a laptop or they're using Ableton or something like that, they're usually much more, they will quantize all that, or they will level all that out in the mix down process, or they have it set in a manner, especially if it's a band that plays out 120 shows a year. They're doing this, 3 times a week or whatever, so they've kind of got all that stuff figured out. So yeah, so that's kind of tracks, and that's with guitars. Keyboards, again, the only thing I usually do with keyboards is keyboards manufacturers put a lot of time and effort into getting keyboards to sound a certain way, getting synthesizers to sound a certain way, an electric piano to sound a certain way, their Hammond organ sound to sound a certain way. So I respect that, and I don't put a lot of ear candy on it because it's already got a bunch of ear candy built into the keyboard. If it's a decent keyboard, I mean, if it's some Casio from Kmart, hey man, it is whatever it is, you know. The other thing is same with guitar players, level out all those patches. And that doesn't mean that they all say 10 in the keyboard. You know, that means you hook your keyboard up to a speaker, a powered speaker or something at home, and download a free sound pressure level app on your phone and go through each one. A horn sound, which is mostly mid-range, will naturally, by the frequency response of the instrument, horns, will be louder than an electric piano, which is much more low mid and has much more subtle frequency response. So you may have to turn the electric piano to 10 and then the horn sound down to like 7 for them to audibly sound the same level. So I could go deep into that, but I'm gonna let that go because I know the video is going late. I'm gonna quit apologizing for going late because I think you guys appreciate, you know, this kind of information. And then finally, vocals. Man, vocals are solely dependent on, you know, the singer's ability to you know, have decent mic technique, project correctly. You know, technically the mic should be about an inch away from your mouth, but if you're a whisper singer, put it against your lips, man. You know, I'm not gonna be mad at you. I'll make it work with compression and stuff like that when you get loud. But the idea behind mic technique, just for the record, and I know this is super elementary, but I see people getting it wrong all the time. I see big name people getting it wrong, like on the Grammys and stuff like that. When you sing louder, that's when you pull the mic away from your mouth a little bit. When you sing softer, you hold the mic closer to your mouth. That's correct mic technique. What ends up happening is people train themselves that when they're weak on a note, they pull the mic away, hoping that no one hears that. Well, when you have, I call it dyslexic mic technique, where you're pulling away when you sing soft, and I have the mic so hot that whether you pull away or not, we're still hearing the note. You're not really suppressing it that much, you know, so own it, dude. You know, that's the point of the conversation, own it. You know, practice correct mic technique. You know, that's enough to drive 16 people crazy. I compress fairly, moderately. At the vocal channel, I do a 7-to-1. Right out of the gate, I bump the makeup gain or the output gain on the compressor up to 4 dB. It might be negative 4 dB. It's like the 9 o'clock on the M32. I get so used to the knobs just being where they are, I don't pay as much attention to the numbers as I probably should. But I use my ear, man. I'm not mixing with my eyes. I'm listening to what it sounds like, and that's how I set my settings, you know, because I want it to be pleasing to the ear. So yes, I do a 7-to-1. I try to compress, and we talked about this in the art of mixing, you know, 6 to 8 dB, somewhere in that ballpark. You know, my attack is, I think, negative 30 or 30 milliseconds or something. I think the hold is like at 12 o'clock. And then I think the release is 151. And that's kind of a go-to compression setting, you know, for me with vocals. You can go back to the art of mixing and hear more details about that. But as I'm doing sound check, I'm trying to gauge. I will go up and ask a singer, if it's someone I've never worked with before, I'm like, do you sing really loud? Are you a strong, loud singer? Or are you a soft, gentle singer, you know? And 99.9% of the time, they're totally aware with how they are and how they sing and that sort of thing. And they won't be offended by you asking them that. And they'll tell you how they sing. Like, yeah, I kind of sing soft, you know, or whatever. Okay, well then I'm going to kick the input gain pretty hard right out of the gate, you know, when we're doing sound check. If they're like someone like, no, I sing pretty loud, you know, well then I'm probably going to kick that back. But, you know, I tend to set my channel fader at about negative 10 during sound check. And the other thing is, don't scream and yell in the mic during sound check and then whisper, sing all night. You know, the sound guy needs to hear the volume that you sing. Not you just yelling and this, that, and the other. Like a lot of people are, hey, 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 that sort of thing. And the mic, it's like, well, do you sing that volume? Why don't you sing a little bit for me so I can hear what your volume is while you're singing? And that usually kind of puts things in perspective. It helps us out an enormous amount. So I open the compressor right out of the gate during sound check. I'm not compressing anything. And I try to get it fairly hot at that -10 with the input gain. And then when the band gets going, then I usually end up at like -5 and even at 0 dB. It gives me room to move. I used to be a guy that said everything at 0 dB unity on the channels and then, just dialed in the input gain where it needed to be. The problem is in some of those cases, I would run out of channel fader gain and then would have to go back and change the input gain. And if you're running monitors from front of house, we all know that messes with the gain structure of your aux sends and your monitor sends. So it's best just to get that gain kind of where you want it at -10 at sound check, and then that gives you a lot of room to go up and down and that sort of thing. And then I'll pull some compression tricks out of my hat to get the vocals where I want them and seat it in the mix where I want them. Same thing at the subgroup where I'm trying to get all the backing vocals to blend together. I do like a 4-to-1 there. And then finally at front of house, I do a 2.5-to-1 usually, or a 3-to-1. And I compress far less at front of house because I want it to be dynamic. I don't want it to be all the same volume all night long, So less is more. So this video went long. I'm not going to apologize for that because there's a ton of really cool information in this video. It's something you can watch over and over, and I think you'll find different things that will apply to your situation throughout that process. I love you guys. The channel's been blowing up a lot here lately, so I don't know if you guys are sharing it or YouTube's finally opening up my content to more viewers, but we're getting a lot more comments and a lot more views and things like that. Thank you guys for that. If you enjoy this content and you've made it 51 minutes into this or whatever it is, man, hit the subscribe button. I'm trying to get to that 500 mark just like everybody and get monetized on YouTube. We're already monetized on the other platforms, but YouTube and TikTok are the last two that we're trying to get and believe me, the money hasn't been great. I think the last check I got was like $25 or $30 or something. We're not getting rich here, but it is nice to at least be, once you're at that monetized level, it opens up a lot of other tools that we can use to get this content to more people. That's really the motivation for that. It's not just about the money, because unless you're turning, millions and millions of views, I seen some butcher today online that said that his last video had over 1 billion views. This guy he butchers meat. I mean, he's really cool and hip and, got a nice beard and all that kind of stuff. I watch his stuff. I think it's entertaining too, and I follow him and everything. But yeah, unless you're turning those kind of numbers, you're not really making much money on here. So I'm doing this for free, guys. Just hit the subscribe button, share the video. I can't say that enough. Here's a couple stats that will blow your mind. My marketing guy says that we're like, I don't know, maybe 85% of you guys that are watching are not subscribed. And if you are subscribed, you don't have to comment and say, well, I was the first one to subscribe. Thank you. I love you. You're my people. Please keep coming back. Please keep sharing the videos. But yeah, the other thing is sharing is, we're not really getting a ton of shares, at least that we can see on our end. And YouTube doesn't give us all the metrics correctly all the time. So we don't really know what the accurate numbers are, but we have ballpark figures, to go by. But yeah, man, I mean, support the channel, support the content. I love doing this stuff. I don't mind taking, a couple hours out of my week to do this, and, 20 minutes out of every morning to do the shorts. On this, we're talking about dock bars and the shorts and the reels, right now. So make sure you get in there and talk about that, or get in there and converse with me there. We have a lot of stuff to talk about when it comes to playing in dock bars, because they're usually kind of rough electricity and hard load ins and all that kind of stuff. So I love you guys. Please come back next week. We'll see you.